rank the albums.
I know there's probably an established indie opinion I ought to have about this ranking. I don't know what that one is, so I'm just gonna have to be honest. And it's an impressive start with a brand of punk that just takes a riff and fire. 18 tracks of that philosophy just blazing through each attempt at a song. They're so loose that you can't always structurally recognize them as songs. It's played and recorded in a way that it may as well be a live album. I mean, they sure didn't overdub the instruments that were out of tune. But that's part of why this really works in a way that's distinct from the Replacement's later established brand. This is very pure, determined, and sincere hardcore. I think it would be easy to listen to this discography in order, notice how awesome this one is, but then forget about it when you get to the Replacement's later defining brand. But here their disdain for music kicks your door down. Then there's one that isn't a full length. And obviously that's gonna dent its chances, but its own description as just being its lead track with a load of B-sides. More on this CD reissue than the original issue, but still not enough to make it be above anything in the final ranking. Just kind of demonstrates what you're getting here, which is basically a between-album single, and maybe in this extended version, a bit of a rarities compilation. And in that context, it's definitely worth checking out, but maybe get to it last. Then an album that charts their course from scrappy silliness all the way through to silly scrappiness. Consider that the title track is a near instrumental just composed as an excuse to say a funny word in a funny way. And that elaborates the discipline here, or lack of. I've already mentioned the very direct charms of early punk Replacements. And I'll soon mention the very direct charms of a more settled-in Replacements. But by sitting between the two, this loses its chance to be essential. Luckily, it doesn't really want that. It chooses to be a goof, and is very welcome there. Just allow it to exist. Then there's a full force, full length that establishes the actual brand of the Replacements. It doesn't fall for the traps of self-seriousness. They're still a band of silly billies, but now the songs have structure to a level that if you made a cover of one of these songs and you changed it a bit, now it would actually be noticed because there is a structure in place in these songs. I think this album is quite widely lauded. There was that Peter Jackson documentary, and when you choose to allow it that status, you're accommodating the Kiss cover and the quite literal dicking around. A silliness that's very welcome in the Replacements, but doesn't necessarily make for a good album. Luckily, the sheer majority of it does, and it's just a thrill to have some very direct Bad Religion sounding hardcore alongside a piano ballad. Well, a sound of trying to learn the piano ballad. That's a good thing, by the way. Time for Tim and maybe their best collection of songs. However, and maybe it's remarkable that I've not had to mention this until now, the 80s standard of production lets this one down. The awful sounding drums either dominate the mix or recede in the mix and still sound awful at either level. It's 2023 and I understand there was a reissue remaster, but it's not being sold for a fair price. I mean, it's free to stream, but these are physical media. And if I let my assessment be directed by that, then I should probably judge every album off its remaster. And that's a different video. I'm not making that video. So those rules I've just surrendered to are a shame because of how good the songs on this are. It vindicates Let It Be's blueprint, but without the dodgy tracks. It's just a shame that all of the tracks sound dodgy. Maybe call this the third in a trilogy of very high quality and quite a consistent vibe. And the vibe of Prime Replacements is a band that started off with that punk energy, learned how to make properly melodic pop songs, but still delivered it with the character of a punk band. All the ways they've refused to be tamed is what makes the Replacements so special. That and the quite brilliant songwriting that's emerged from such initially simplistic songwriting. But the content is tasty while the texture is rough. It is crunchy peanut butter. And this album is the fullest example of that working. It's only by the time they get to the last track and there's some jarring horn overdub perhaps that the whims of the industry and some imagined mainstream audience they would try to appeal to start to cast a shadow over the Replacements' music. But it doesn't quite overwhelm the quality of that song, and on the way there, this is prime Replacements, which necessitates past their prime Replacements. There's an irrevocable turn here from a band whose bigness was an incidental strength to one that's big on purpose. Songs written before they were played, lyrics written like stadium stand-up. The peanut butter has turned to smooth, and you initially think, well, smooth is smoother, it's kind of nicer, until you're actually tasting it, listening to it. And the most satisfying aspects of the Replacements are starting to turn a little bland. But only starting, and only a little. This is still good. As they now actually feel like they want an audience, they've ensured to focus on making a few great tracks. But that comes at the expense of this work's coherence and essentialness as an album, and that's where it puts it. It's kind of an album constructed to have tracks extracted from it for the best of. Then it's a bit of a Shaggy Dog story to get into, but this was almost a solo album, but wriggles and wrinkles in the contract got this eventually released under the band name, even though the other members didn't contribute all that much. And in this video, I'm not going into Paul's solo work, except to the extent that I slightly am because I'm looking at this. I think the regard of a post-band solo album is still the best way to understand this, because that explains the type and the distribution of quality on this one. With less of a band sound, with less of that essential character to the Replacements where it sounds like they're actually on stage. This time around it has to come straight down to the songwriting. And really that's only partly turned up. I know that there's a rarities compilation disc, and I'm skipping it. There's also one extra EP and one much later reunion covers EP. They're just not very interesting.